Hello and welcome for an update on VMware Cloud Director Service. I'm John Dwyer, Director of Product Management in the CSBU. Today, some of our slides will contain roadmaps, so just be conscious of that when sharing or relaying this information. We're going to take a little look at what is the context, what drove us to make this investment, and then give an overview of the use cases, user experience, and the roadmap of what is yet to come. So traditionally, our service providers have been cloud builders. They've been asset heavy. They've been building and operating the VMware infrastructure in their data center. As we launched VMware Cloud on AWS, we noticed that we were getting more and more asset-light providers. They were leveraging the scale and economics of public cloud to deliver VMware-based solutions. And at the same time, we received more and more next-gen MSPs. They were building profitable managed services on top of these public clouds, but they're really focused on the cost management and operations. The providers that have been embracing these three different personas have been the most successful. They're bringing together their own infrastructure with asset light and layering managed services on top of the whole thing. Our service provider, or our cloud providers, our asset-heavy providers that have been using VMware Cloud Director, started off in the data center, but then they've been moving out or wanting to move out into public cloud. They want to expand their business. They want to go multi-cloud. At the same time, we've experienced these cloud renters, asset-light MSPs that were born in the cloud, but they're actually going in the other direction. It's not that they're acquiring assets, but they're reaching into the data center and doing things like IT management, IT outsourcing. The key piece that's been missing is one common cloud management platform, no matter where you're operating, to deliver your managed services and your cloud business. Cloud Director Service allows you to do it. It takes everything great about VMware Cloud Director, the extensibility platform, the ability to build and operate a business on VMware-based infrastructure, and it packages it into a new SaaS-based delivery model. This new delivery model is using the same exact code base. We didn't fork the code base or do anything different. We invested heavily in how we manage it. How do we SaaSify it? So how do we do the operations, the upgrades, and deliver it to our partners? Using Cloud Director Service on VMware Cloud on AWS is a logical extension. It allows you to take the underlying infrastructure that's provided by VMware operating on top of the AWS infrastructure and expand it to new use cases. You can go after new markets, smaller markets. When we talk to our service providers, their average end consumer is in the 30 to 50 VM range. So using a service like Cloud Director Service on top of VMware Cloud on AWS allows them to go get after a smaller customer base. And the key thing is it allows them to deliver a consistent cloud experience between their data center, if they're existing VCD customers, and this new infrastructure that's delivered by VMware Cloud on AWS. For those that haven't been keeping up with the developments of VMware Cloud Director and what it offers, we abstract away the underlying VMware infrastructure, the SDDCs. So by layering Cloud Director Service on top of VMware Cloud on AWS, we take the underlying SDDC and we create a provider virtual data center. So this is VCD's core abstraction layer. It's our grouping of compute, network, and storage. I like to think of this as the bucket of infrastructure resources that we're going to be able to subdivide up. And as a service provider, I can now create tenants. So in this case, I have tenant Pepsi, and I can create them their very own organization virtual data center. This is like their own little virtual private cloud, and it's made up of different provider VDCs. So I can have a primary organization virtual data center here built out of PVDC East, and I can have a secondary one out of PVDC Atlanta. And what this has done is it's allowed the service provider to take two separate SDDCs living in two separate locations, give access to their downstream tenant, and this is how availability zones manifest in VCD. So I've given my customer access to two completely separate fault domains through the same interface. And part of the key value here is that I can also provision tenant Coca-Cola And Coke can have a slice of resources in the exact same provider virtual data center. So this is allowing me to take advantage of that one SDDC and have many tenants running on it, so that I can start small. When I look at VMware Cloud on AWS, I can start as small as 2 hosts, and then grow as my customer base grows. So I don't have to make a big commitment to get started. The other thing that VCD does is allows us to have multiple ways to create these organization virtual data centers. So in this case, I have tenant Sprite. And you'll notice that tenant Sprite's prod org VDC and their stage org VDC is out of the same region, out of the same PVDC West. And when I create these organization virtual data centers, this is an example of how service providers can differentiate and decide how they want to build their business of selling these resources. So for production, because it's really important, I can give the end user Sprite a reserved instance, a reserved pool of resources. They effectively get a box of resources, and they can put as many virtual machines as they want into this box. They have to manage their own oversubscription rates. But as a service provider, I'm just charging them for the entire box of resources. I'm not worried about how many virtual machines. On the flip side, I have Sprite Stage here coming out of the same SDDC. And Stage is important for testing, but I don't necessarily need to have a guarantee on having all the resources needed, unlike production. So with Stage, I could get a partial guarantee on the resources. And in VCD, we call this an allocation pool, where I have a guarantee on a certain commitment of resources. So it's kind of like a commit and overage model. So I can go beyond, I can create more virtual machines if I want, but I might not have the same guarantee on the resources as that underlying commit. And then finally, I have Sprite Dev, and this one's actually coming out of a different SDDC or a different PVDC here, PVDC Phoenix. It could have came out of the same one, but in this case, we chose to just provision it in a different data center, maybe as the service provider charges a little less in this other data center. But I can do a pay-as-you-go model, which is really just pay for what you use. There's no guarantee on resources. It's giving access to the system. More of a traditional cloud model where I'm actually paying for what I use all along. So with VCD and Cloud Director Service layered on top of VMware Cloud on AWS or any other cloud, we can deliver a bunch of flexible business models that the MSPs can choose to use and subdivide the resources and sell to their downstream tenants. So one of the advantages of Cloud Director Service and VCD as they're paired together is the fact that you can expand what you currently have. So we have over here on the left, we have an existing VCD on premises. We have it connected to your existing infrastructure in your data center. But we could actually pair these together. And we'll talk about this in a second with the Cloud Director Service on top of VMware Cloud on AWS. But that's not where we're stopping with Cloud Director Service. Our goal is really to provide flexibility and choice to capture the multi-cloud market for all service providers, no matter where they want to operate their business. So soon in the future, we'll introduce Cloud Director Service being able to connect into their data centers on things like VMware Cloud Foundation or Dell, VMware Cloud on Dell. And this will allow them to, take advantage of the lifecycle management and the extra features that are coming, the bolt-on features that are coming on Cloud Director Service, so they don't have to install and operate it themselves. And so they can really focus just on the managed services and what makes them unique. And finally, we'll be expanding into the other hyperscaler clouds. We'll be expanding into Azure with the Azure VMware Service, as well as Google with the Google VMware Compute Engine. As I mentioned before, one of the key things with VCD and now with Cloud Director Service is that you can bring the two together. You can actually federate in a multi-site fashion these instances together. So in this case, I have Cloud Director Service on the left, running on top of VMware Cloud on AWS. And on the right, I have a provider installed Cloud Director instance connecting into their own data center. I like to think of these when you pair them together as regions, because you're really bringing together discrete instances, getting a nice, simple single sign-on experience, and giving access to all the different resources underneath to your end consumers. So through the multi-site feature, we actually federate together. And when you put a load balancer in front, a global load balancer, when your end users, or even you as the provider admin, log in, you get one consistent experience. So you get to log in, you get to see your resources. In this case, in this case, you get to see your resources here in this Chinese-based region, with 2 different organization virtual data centers or availability zones. And I have a US-based region down here with 2 different US-based organization virtual data centers or availability zones. So as a provider, I can expand my business. I can take my existing investment in VMware Cloud Director and I can expand it with Cloud Director Service into these new geographies and give that same simple branded experience to my consumers. But it isn't just on-premises VCD with Cloud Director Service. You can use Cloud Director Service with Cloud Director Service and pair them together. So this could allow you to expand to things like having a US-based region with availability zones paired together with a European-based CDS instance with different SDDCs to make up those availability zones. So you could really build a total global business just on CDS alone. And in the future, when we introduce the Azure VMware Solutions and VMware Cloud Foundation, it opens up endless possibilities to where the infrastructure is coming from and how these service providers can string together the resources and deliver their branded cloud experience. With that, let's actually take a quick look at how I could deliver a branded cloud experience. So I'm going to jump over to a live demo we have here. So we're looking now at the cloud.vmware.com console. So I'm logged in, and this is the experience that a service provider would get. You'll notice I have a new tile here, VMware Cloud Director. I'm going to click on that. And once I log in, I have a very simple option to create a new instance. So I'm going to click this. I'm going to create a new name. So you can give this any name you want. This is just the name you're going to use to refer to your instance. I'm going to select an environment. Right now, we have Tokyo, Frankfurt, and US West Oregon as options. I'm going to pick an upgrade category. So right now we have 2 options, basically production and preview. Production is what you want to run if you're going to run any live customers on it. Preview is where we give access to earlier builds. So if we want to run a beta for these guys and maybe they want to test some integration software that they've written with the instance, you can go in and provision a brand new instance on bleeding edge code and do all your testing without actually having to impact your production environment. In this case, I'm just going to pick production. You get to pick the initial password that is used for the administrator account. So this administrator account is used to bootstrap the environment. We're going to accept the charges. So you'll notice here it says charges start once you connect an SDDC. So we don't actually charge when you spin up the instance. It's only when Cloud Director Service starts managing the underlying ESXi capacity that's underneath the SDDC. And we'll talk about pricing a little later. So I clicked create. So these instances take around 5 minutes to come up. Like I said, it's the existing VCD code base. It's the same code base we use on-prem. It's just it's being deployed in a Kubernetes environment. We take advantage of some of the services that Kubernetes have to do things like auto scaling on the cells. While this is coming up, let's skip over to one that I actually already have provisioned in the interest of time. I'm going to click into this other Cloud Director Service instance. And you'll notice that I have this instance already set up, moonbeam.cloud. So this is my fictitious MSP that I've been working with. You'll notice that on the instance, we have a couple options down here. So we can create a support bundle. So if I want to do some debugging, many service providers, if they're used to using VCD on premises, they're used to being able to log into the instance and look at the log files and do some initial triaging. Since this is running in Kubernetes, we actually had to expose a way for them to grab those log bundles and download them to look at them. So you can do that right here. We can reset that initial password that you set during the provisioning in case they haven't, forget the password and need to get access again. The other thing here too is you'll notice we have some associate custom domain options. My environment has some new feature flags turned on. That's why I have 2 right now. But when these instances are initially provisioned, like that one we just kicked off, they come up with a generated DNS and they come up with self-signed certs. And the idea here is that the provider can then log in and completely customize this. It's really about giving this service provider an ability to stand up the face of their business between them, their downstream tenants, and the backing infrastructure. So you create a CNAME record on a domain you own, pointing to this generated DNS, and you also upload your own real certificates. So in this case, I've actually done that, and we'll take a look at that. You can also configure VMware Cloud Service as the IDP. So initially, we created that administration username and password to bootstrap the environment. I can do some custom configuration there. But we can also leverage, and they're now configured by default to use the cloud.vmware.com IDP to provide SSO. So I'll get SSO sign in between these two. The service provider can always log in and override this. They can use their on-premises identity federation of choice, just like they can with VCD on-premises. You also notice that I have an option to configure upgrade. So when it's time to upgrade the instance, we use this option to give the provider the ability to choose when their maintenance window is for when their instance will be upgraded to the latest version of VCD. So in this case, I'm going to open up VCD. You'll notice that I get single sign-on through cloud.vmware.com. I'm a VMware employee, so we go to workspace 1, and we get redirected back. The first thing you'll notice here is now I'm using a custom domain name. I have real certificates installed. And the other thing too is you'll notice that this doesn't look like Cloud Director out of the box. I've applied a custom theme for my fictitious service provider here, Moonbeam Cloud. And this allows me to really match my corporate branding and make the Cloud Director instance part of my business. I've already gone through and I've provisioned a bunch of customers in here. And if I go over to one of them, this would be more of the tenant experience. I logged in as the service provider. But as a tenant, when I log in, I've been given access to an organization virtual data center to start provisioning virtual machines. I can take a look here. I have my own virtual machine already provisioned. I have a network that I've been given access to, and I also have my own edge gateway where I can control the access in and out of my environment. If I log out of here, we can see what the full tenant experience would be. So, the key thing here is that my service provider has given me access, and so if I go to this domain, I'll get the service provider's branded experience to log in and gain access to my resources. So that's just a quick overview of Cloud Director Service and what we have available today. So let's talk a little bit more about where we're available. So if we skip ahead here, like I said, we're available in US West. So this map also shows the availability of VMware Cloud on AWS. So from US West, we can connect Cloud Director Service to pretty much every single availability zone that VMware Cloud is in North America. And this is governed by the same requirement that we have with Cloud Director on premises, and that's 150 milliseconds of latency. So where Cloud Director Service lives, as long as the SDDC is within 150 milliseconds of latency, you can connect. In Europe, with Frankfurt location, we can cover all of Europe. And with APJ, with Tokyo, we can cover all of APJ. These are all available now. And the one exception to that is you'll notice a purple dot down there on Sydney. We can connect to Sydney right now from Tokyo, but it's kind of right at the edge of our latency boundary. And so we're going to be standing up, and it should be available very soon, a new Sydney location that will allow you to deploy Cloud Director Services instances right in Sydney. So let's talk a little bit about the network topology. What do you have today? So traditionally, when you got VMware Cloud on AWS, you had two gateways pre-configured on the instance. You had a management gateway for controlling access to the vCenter, ESX, and NSX, and you had a compute gateway that you used to configure access to all of the underlying virtual machines. So when you enable Cloud Director Service on top of VMware Cloud on AWS, we actually get a brand new feature that was released just for Cloud Director Service that allows you to provision more than one of these compute gateways. For those familiar with VCD, these are what we call organization virtual data center gateways. They're backed by NSX T1 gateways. And so this allows us to do isolation at the networking level between individual tenants. So you'll see here in my graphic, I have a separate tenant T1 gateway, T1 CGW. I called it in here just to try to keep the terminology consistent between tenant A, tenant B, and tenant C. The other thing that this allows you to do, you'll notice here, is we have overlapping IP space. So as soon as you have this boundary, you don't have to worry about overlapping IP space. So you can have the same or you can have different down here. Each compute gateway will get an IP that's configured in VCD land. This is called a external network. So each downstream tenant gets access to pre-configured IP. The service provider has choice of how they define this network. It's like a transit network that's between the gateways and the internet. Some service providers are currently using this to plumb in management, monitoring tools, things like that. But with VMware Cloud on AWS, you can take advantage of the public IP addressing that's available. So you can go in, request access to a public IP, and create a NAT from the public IP on the through the VMware Cloud on AWS console to the IP that's configured as the front-end IP on this tenant gateway. And once you've done that, now the tenant can use this public IP, and they have full self-service control over their gateway, where they can control the access in and out of their own organization network. As far as migration, we have kind of a couple options right now. When we initially launched from our initial availability, we recommended using HCX, but there's some pretty big limitations with HCX. So the HCX that comes with VMware Cloud on AWS is not compatible with VCD or Cloud Director Service. So the recommended approach here is basically you don't do an integration with VCD. You use it as it was designed to do vSphere to vSphere replication. VCD has this great feature that was built in a few years ago called auto import. So as a service provider, as long as you own both sides of the infrastructure, the source infrastructure, in this case, I have a vSphere 5.5 Plus labeled one, going to VMware Cloud on AWS, I can connect HCX between the two. And if I do a migration from the vSphere on-premises instance to the VMware Cloud on AWS, as long as I drop it in the right resource pool and folder that VCD knows about, VCD will see the VM and it will import it into its inventory for management. The key thing here is that the service provider really has to own both sides of the migration, because HCX, because it's integrated vSphere to vSphere, there's no concept of tenant boundaries that VCD layers on top. So it really has to be a fully managed migration provided by the service provider. We also have other options available for doing migration. There's a third party called Primary IO that has certified support for CDS. We've also seen some providers starting to use Veeam's backup as a way to migrate in. And Veeam is currently certified and operable with CDS. Coming soon, we'll have a version of Cloud Director availability. We're expecting to be in beta with that in the next few months, depending on what time you're watching this video. And we'll be exposing that sometime in the Q2, Q3 timeframe out to tenants. So we'll run through the beta, and if the beta is successful, we will, it'll be sooner than later that we'll have Cloud Director availability as an option for migration and DR into a Cloud Director service instance. So now let's take a look at the roadmap and where we are. So right now in Q1 of FY22, we're working pretty hard to get our APIs available in a tech preview. So our APIs obviously are available now, but we haven't published our documentation. So we're working on getting the documentation published out. We already have some providers that have looked at our UI and reverse engineered our APIs, and they're using them. So we have to formalize them and make them available for all tenants. We've also been testing against Azure VMware Solutions, so we're hoping to get into a tech preview this quarter. We have a bunch of enhancements that have been driven through Cloud Partner Navigator. One of them is on-prem VCD inventory view, and the key thing here is if you use that multi-site feature of CDS connected back to the VCD instance, when you log into Cloud Partner Navigator, soon you'll have the ability to actually see your resources on premises. So this will give you a holistic view of your cloud, whether it is in the cloud based on VMware Cloud on AWS and CDS, or if it's on premises in your own data center. You get that consistent view. As we mentioned earlier, we have support for Sydney region coming online. We also have some enhancements to our bandwidth bandwidth monitoring and metering, we should say. Today out of the box, it's not quite clear what is available from a metering standpoint on a per tenant basis. Everything's aggregated at the top level. So we have, as a BU, some scripts that we put out to help you get that data, so that if you have a provider that actually wants to do tenant by tenant chargeback, we'll have a piece of that coming soon, or some scripts to give you a basic version is what I should say. The other thing too is we're switching over how we connect into the VMC environments. To date, we've kind of poked holes in the firewall for CDS through, from the well-known IPs of where CDS is originating from to gain access to the vCenter, NSX Manager, and ESX hosts. In the future, very soon, we're going to be switching over to a proxy-based appliance for doing this. This will eliminate the need to have inbound connectivity. The appliance will just open a reverse proxy to provide a tunnel back out that CDS uses to get in. And the reason we're switching to this is to provide a consistent experience. No matter where CDS is managing, we want to connect the same way. So whether it's on premises or in VMC, we'll have the same deployment model that we're following. The other thing that's been a big feature ask is support for a native VPN. So with VMware Cloud on AWS, the VPN that you get in Direct Connect is terminated on the T0. So we're going to be exposing here in the near future the ability to actually terminate VPNs on the T1. And this is key because it allows self-service setup of VPNs through VCD by the tenants. So that's something that we're currently in the process of validating and looking to expose in a future release of VMware Cloud on AWS. We're also going through our next phase, and now looking into Q2, we're going through our next phase of the SOC 2 Type 2 compliance certification. We've already achieved SOC 2 Type 1, so we're doing the next step of that. We're also looking to improve our trial experience. Today, we have a couple options for trial. So if you have partners that are interested, we have a POC, which can be done for 1 week, where we actually provide a VMC host and CDS access so that they can spend a week exploring, CDS with the VMC connected to it. But if they want to go beyond that, they have to actually provide their own hosts. And in the future, we're actually looking to make it an easier integration through Cloud Provider Navigator so that we can have push-button trials available to all customers. Another thing that's been on the backlog is an update to our distributed firewall in Cloud Director. And I'm very careful when I say Cloud Director here because it's a limitation in Cloud Director, not the actual service, which was Today in Cloud Director, we only support static firewall rules on the distributed firewall. It was just where we were at the time with our integration with NSXT. And this is something that's actively in development. So in our next release of VCD that'll be coming out, we'll support dynamic firewall rule creation. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to have Cloud Director availability on the platform. So this will be installed by the provider. It won't be a SaaS service. It'll be an installation, but it'll help support migration in DR to CDS from on-premises in a tenant-safe way. So it'll get around some of the limitations we currently have with HCX. The other thing that we will have soon is a integration with VMware Cloud, specifically the tenant app. So today, many providers use VROps on premises with our tenant app to do usage and in some cases billing for their downstream tenants. So with the launch of VROps Cloud as a SaaS service, we will be in beta very soon and looking to roll into production in Q2, the ability to actually connect a hosted SaaS version of the tenant app with Cloud Director service to do that usage and chargeback. When we look beyond the next 2 quarters and we just look on the roadmap, how we're thinking about the future, the future, we're really looking at how do we expand to all these different cloud endpoints, things like Dimension, VMware Cloud on Dell, as well as VMware Cloud Foundation on premises, giving providers the ability to connect to these different environments, as well as Google Compute Engine. So these are all that we're working through. We're kind of prioritizing and going to work down through the backlog as far as endpoints. The other thing, we're waiting for some core enhancements from the underlying, in this case, NSXT as well as VMware Cloud on AWS is better insight into this tenant-based bandwidth metering and monitoring. So to holistically fix this, we actually had to get a request into the NSBU to make a change to NSXT. They've already made the change. We're just going to, be waiting for those newest builds of NSXT to actually make it into VMware Cloud on AWS, and we'll be able to take advantage of that. So, the goal is that in the near future, we'll be able to provide very granular information on the tenant-based consumption of bandwidth. The other thing too is we're going to continually work with different ISVs to expand our ecosystem. I mentioned we have primary IO and Veeam supported now, but we're looking to partner and provide more options for service providers to use within Cloud Director's ecosystem. We're also working through how do we expand the set of services that are offered. Part of the value that you get with consuming Cloud Director service is more out of the box, I like to say. So VCD in general has had a bunch of add-ons, plugins that have been available, App Launchpad, Object Storage Extension, both of which are supported today with CDS. So if you install App Launchpad, Object Storage Extension, Container Service Extension, all these you can deploy yourself as a service provider, and you can use them with CDS. But in the near future, we want to get to a point where you can get push button deployment of these, so you don't have to do the initial bring up. All right, and lastly, let's talk about the pricing. So as far as pricing goes, Cloud Director service is priced per core, and that's actually physical core, and that's really important with the introduction in VMware Cloud on AWS of the i3EN hosts, because they have hyper-threading enabled, and they actually give you a much higher number of logical cores. So when you're looking at this pricing, remember that it's physical core based. And the reason we did core-based pricing is because with our future plans to provide CDS on many different cloud endpoints, we wanted to have a consistent pricing experience. And by just monitoring the number of hosts under management and how many cores they have, it allows us to have consistent pricing, whether it's in the cloud or on premises. So all instances come out of the box as soon as you connect with on-demand pricing. And so this is, specifically as you use it, the amount of cores under management, you get billed on an hourly rate. Once you're more comfortable with, or maybe you've signed a long-term downstream tenant, you want to commit to the service, we give you the ability to actually buy subscriptions to Cloud Director service. And these can be 1 year or 3 year subscriptions. And you get a 30 or 50% discount, respective, or depending on which one you do. We just recently also introduced a monthly billing option. So if you do the 1 year subscription and you pay up front, you get a little bit more of a discount than if you do a 1 year subscription and you choose to pay on that on a monthly basis. And we have multiple currencies supported: US dollar, euros, sterling pound, Australian dollar, Japanese yen, Chinese yen. So many different ways to transact. So I appreciate you guys taking the time and listening to an update on Cloud Director service today. If you have any questions, please reach out to the PM team and or the tech marketing or product marketing teams. We can be reached on the internal alias or even external alias of Ask Cloud Director Service at VMware.com. And thank you again.